reputably rubbish, on taking our pleasure of torturing Chris.
I would like to start off by thanking my husband, who chooses to remain anonymous, I believe out of embarrassment, for suggesting this movie for defense. Van Helsing. One of the 10 worst movies I have ever seen. I love my husband, I love my husband, I love my husband, I love my husband.
Come now, Chris, not every marriage can be as perfect as that is Cary Grant with Virginia Cheryl, or Randolph Scott with Marianne DuPont.
You haven't caught up on your history, have you?
No.
Why? Don't Google it.
What's Google?
Van Helsing. It had good music. Thank you for joining me this week.
Mr. Chris?
Yes, Gregory.
It is my responsibility as your legal counsel to point out that it is in your marriage contract to take this video seriously.
Fine. By now, it should be obvious that I can't stand this movie, which even to me is a conundrum because I adore gothic, horror, and schlocky B movies. I read Penny Dreadfuls. My favorite vinyl album is the soundtrack to Elvira's Haunted Hills. The Universal Monster Bash pinball machine is one of the best tables ever created. My cat's named after Vincent Price. And thanks to better living through streaming technology, we can watch Elvira's shows whenever we want. The idea of a mashup of the classic Universal monsters in an action-adventure setting should be completely up my alley, especially considering I had a great time watching The Mummy. It could be that with my love of these genres that I have a personal bias that's going to interfere with, that might not be the case. It's best that we acknowledge the pieces that did not work, which unfortunately were so large and fundamental that they steamrolled the rest of the movie. I don't take joy in doing this because filmmakers don't devote their time, energy, passion, and talents with the intent of making something bad. The makers of 1993's Fantastic Four had no idea that it was never intended for actual release. It's even more difficult knowing that this film was done in loving memory of the father of the writer and director, Stephen Sommers. But if Psycho has taught us anything, it's that not everything that's done for the love of a parent has the best results.
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
So, on to the bad. And there's so much bad. The costume and makeup designs for Kevin O'Connor for Igor and Richard Roxburgh as Dracula was so bad that it completely distracted you from the movie. Performances by the two respected actors were both over the top to the point of being cartoonish. As a result, they ended up playing more caricatures than actual characters. This removed any and all sense of danger and intimidation from the classic villains. Yes, I know that these are Universal monster villains, and as such there's a certain level of camp, but if you look at 1999's The Mummy, Arnold Vosloo worked with the camp and still brought intimidation and gravitas to Imhotep. But they also had a pretty buff Arnold Vosloo running around without his shirt on, so that definitely helped. Given that The Mummy and Van Helsing shared the same writer and director as Stephen Sommers, the fact that Van Helsing was lacking any intimidating antagonists was a missed opportunity. And now for a quick observation about The Mummy.
Good luck, boys.
Sweet Jesus! Tasted just like blood.
And the rivers and waters of Egypt ran red and were as blood.
We were just doing shots of water?
Get back to Van Helsing!
The vampire's ball only added to the confusion on whether or not Dracula could make progeny. The laws of physics are simply suggestions. The character designs for Dracula's brides are an absolute muddled mess. Major changes were made to the lore of most of the creatures. Van Helsing himself had his name changed from Abraham to Gabriel, so he's actually not the Van Helsing from the Dracula book. Then they shoehorned in this Vatican-based secret society for Van Helsing to even make sense in this world. Those were the issues.
You didn't say anything about the computer-generated images.
Oh, look at you, Belle, trying to use technical buzzwords.
Christopher! We older individuals,
Older individuals, you died in 1961.
as I was saying, we older individuals have the ability to adapt and learn new skills just as you do. So check your flawed biases before you embarrass yourself further.
Now, you're right, Bill. I apologize. I should be more respectful.
Very good. Google machine, call Chris a middle-aged self-righteous prat.
Chris is a middle-aged, self-righteous prat whose attempts at making YouTube videos are tragic indication that he is struggling desperately with his midlife crisis and is ignoring his certain and inevitable doom.
I like this machine.
Are you done?
Oh, Chris, this is but the beginning.
As I was saying, I rewatched this film in preparation for making this video and found that there were several components that were fantastic. The other factors that didn't work, well, they were a bit more complicated. So, what they got right. The sets were beautifully designed and felt organic to the world while paying homage to the classic films. Kate Beckinsale understood her character and gave a great performance with believability despite the camp around her. The practical effects and model work added detail and reality to this fantastical world. Sadly, this is where we have to pivot and to address the largest issues with the movie. Let's start off with the plot being overly complex in an effort to bring the classic movie monsters together. The funny thing is, they didn't have to use a convoluted plot in order to do this. The werewolf and Jekyll and Hyde are both already set in England, while Victor Frankenstein and Dracula travel to England. All of these stories take place in the late 1800s, so it stands to reason that if these creatures live in a shared universe, they can be in the same place at the same time without any character alterations. Abraham Van Helsing, being an eccentric professor specializing in supernatural and morbid studies, would naturally be drawn to these phenomena. This would have simplified the story, kept all the creatures true to their original origins, and gotten rid of the entire backstory about the Vatican. No alterations to the creatures nor to Van Helsing were needed. Now, when it comes to the visual effects, they show that they learned absolutely nothing from the dreaded Scorpion King. But there are two ways that they could have worked with this limitation in technology for a better film. One way is they could have worked with practical effects similar to American Werewolf in London while using CG components to touch up and smooth the transitions. Another way is by using an artistic choice. The film already started off in black and white as an homage to the classic films, but it also showed what was going on in that sequence happened in the past. As that past sequence was only 1 year earlier, the transition to color was not only unnecessary, but distracting. So I ran a bit of an experiment, and this is the same experiment that I used with another one of the worst movies that I've ever seen. I watched a portion of this film other than the opening in black and white. Like what I discovered in The Munsters, it improved the experience for two reasons. On a technical level, it removed the color matching and light saturation issues that plagued the early CG effects. On a level of viewer experience, having color automatically brings a relatability to this new world. We as viewers now have an expectation of similar practicalities and real-world sensibilities. By keeping the film in black and white, it removes a bit of that relatability, which allows the world of the film to have its own set of rules. The camp, visual effects, and physics are now easier to accept. So, all things considered, were there things in Van Helsing that were good? Absolutely. The problem is that the bad is so bad that it far outweighs the good. On paper, a collaborative monster mashup action-adventure featuring an up-and-rising Hugh Jackman with the writer and director of The Mummy makes perfect sense. Unfortunately, the damning issues were on the shoulders of writer and director Stephen Sommers. But there may be a good reason. A few weeks ago, I did a 6-minute video on the importance of bad movie nights as a memoir to a friend of mine that I recently lost. It was a part of my grieving process, and it made me break down a dozen times in tears. I can't imagine what it would be like for a 2-hour-long film dredging up all sorts of memories of a lost parent, with the added pressure of making a summer blockbuster. This is purely speculation. For me, the largest reason that this movie remains in my top 10 worst movies list is due to the absolute lack of fun. And do not play the Van Helsing drinking game. You're just going to end up with an angry drunk while watching a terrible movie. If you want to have an enjoyable experience with a mashup of the classic horror monsters, play the board game Horrified. As for Stephen Sommers, I wouldn't mind seeing him taking up an actual B movie. If you think there's a movie that's in dire need of defense, comment below, let me know. And until then, take it away, my mistress of the dark.
Well, you little videotape worms, it's time for me to skedaddle. So wind me up and put me back in my box. Until next time, unpleasant dreams.
Thank you for watching this talkie picture. Please leave a message down below, select the like picture, and subscribe to be a member of our community. Thank you.